Before we get into the video, could everyone please subscribe to my channel? Thank you so much. Her parents sold her because of infertility until a lonely lumberjack with 4 children took her in. She's pretty, but she can't bear children. What good is she? A barren tree, please. Please. Mabel's voice trembled as her father shoved her forward, making her stumble into the dusty center of the market square. Men laughed, women whispered, and children watched wide-eyed from behind apron skirts. The spring wind carried the stench of manure and smoke, but nothing stung more than the shame in Mabel's chest. Her father, once a respected cattle broker, was now a bitter man chasing debt. He turned to the crowd. Half the price of a steer, folks. She can cook, sew, and keep quiet. Anyone with enough coin can take her home tonight. Mabel's cheeks burned, not just from the sun but from memories of her wedding dress being torn from her, of being dragged out of her husband's house like a thief. She had spent 2 years trying to conceive, praying nightly, swallowing every bitter herb the midwife gave her. Nothing. And then, just like that, her husband took another wife, a younger girl, loud and cunning, who kissed her mother-in-law's hand and declared she'd bear 5 sons if the Lord allowed. Mabel wasn't even allowed to stay until sunset. They threw her out the same day the new girl arrived. Now here she stood, dust on her hem, bruises on her pride, and nowhere to go. Anyone? Her father barked. She's 22, still has her teeth, just faulty inside. There was a silence, long and ugly. Then the crowd parted, bootsteps heavy, slow, purposeful. A man stepped forward, tall and broad-shouldered, his shirt stained with sap and sawdust. His hat shadowed most of his face, but his jaw was strong, his hands rough from work, and his eyes, when he looked up, were not cruel, just tired. Silas didn't speak. He reached into the folds of his coat and pulled out a leather pouch. The coins clinked as they hit the table, no bartering, no question, just enough to silence the jeers. Mabel's father raised an eyebrow. You sure she don't come with a refund? Silas looked at Mabel for one long moment, then turned back to her father. She won't be judged anymore, that was all he said. Then he turned and walked away without glancing to see if she followed. Mabel stood frozen, hands trembling. Was this really better? Was this mercy or just another prison? The crowd was already losing interest, drifting away. Her father gave her a shove. Go on then, you're his now. She picked up her satchel, barely anything in it but a pair of old shoes and a locket with her mother's face inside, and followed the man into the dust. Silas had a mule-drawn cart tied outside the blacksmith's. He didn't help her up, just waited. When she finally climbed in, he handed her a canteen. Long ride. She drank, the water tasted of tin and silence. They traveled in near quiet, the prairie stretching on either side, fields of dry grass, fences leaning like old men, and a sky that went on forever. Mabel glanced sideways at him more than once. His face was weathered but not old. 30, maybe younger. There was no wedding ring on his hand, just a nick on the knuckle and a splinter stuck in his thumb. Why, she finally whispered, why did you take me? He didn't look at her. For kids, he said flatly. No mother, no time to find one the polite way. Mabel's breath caught. So I'm a governess? No, just someone not cruel. That's enough. The cart rocked as they crossed a creek bed. Her heart beat in her ears. That night, they arrived at a cabin nestled in a grove of pine and cottonwood. The front porch sagged, a wagon wheel leaned against the barn, and chickens scattered as they pulled in. 4 children peeked from behind a curtain, 3 boys, 1 girl, all with red cheeks and wide, suspicious eyes. This is Ms. Mabel, Silas told them. She'll be staying. The youngest boy, barely 3, toddled over and wrapped his arms around Silas's leg. Silas picked him up with one hand and opened the door with the other. Room upstairs, he said to Mabel. Warm water's in the bucket. She climbed the stairs, her legs shaking. The bed was small but clean, a single window overlooked the field. She sat on the edge and wept, soft and without sound. She had not chosen this, but for the first time in weeks, no one asked her why she was broken, and no one demanded she be anything else. Silas's cabin stood quiet at the edge of the pine woods, like it had always been there, grown from bark and time. The roof was patched with tread hides. The porch creaked under every step, and there was no front door, only a blanket nailed over the frame to keep the wind out. Inside, the air smelled of pine resin, old bread, and children's socks. The 4 little ones weren't saints, they were wild like pups, quick to scatter, slow to trust. The oldest boy, Josiah, tested Mabel with narrowed eyes. The second, Eli, was louder, always hungry. The girl, Hannah, clung to her father's pant leg like a burr, and the youngest, Benji, could not say her name yet but followed her shadow like it was safer than his own. Mabel started slowly. She boiled water on the wood stove, burned the first pot of beans, and cried when the bread didn't rise. She stitched socks with fingers that hadn't held a needle in weeks. She did not speak much, her voice was too fragile still. One afternoon, while trying to lift a pot of stew, she slipped and sent the whole thing crashing to the floor. The sound startled the hens outside. The children froze. Mabel stared at the mess in horror, sure that a slap or scream would follow, but Silas only walked over, squatted down, picked up the pot, and said, "It's only stew." That was all, no anger, no disappointment. That night, she sat outside on the porch, trying not to cry again. She failed. Later, she tucked the children in. Her hands shook a little as she pulled the quilt over Benji's chest. He coughed, Hannah whimpered and clung to her. Again, she tried humming an old lullaby, her voice unsure, trembling like the wick of a dying candle. And then a storm came. The wind howled, trees leaned, and the girl, Hannah, burned up with fever. Silas, who could swing an axe with one hand, stared helplessly at the child, unsure what to do. Mabel moved fast. She boiled willow bark, crushed mint leaves, and bathed the girl's forehead in cool cloths, murmuring gently through the night. Her hands never stopped moving, not once. She did not sleep. When dawn broke, the girl's fever had broken too. Hannah opened her eyes and mumbled something about pancakes. Silas stood in the doorway, arms folded, saying nothing, but his jaw slackened and his shoulders dropped. He looked at Mabel like she had done something holy. Mabel, bleary and too tired to smile, only nodded. That morning, after she got the children dressed, she came downstairs and saw a kettle on the stove. Steam curled from the spout, a mug waited beside it, and on the table lay a small note in stiff, uneven handwriting, "Thank you." She smiled again. No name, no signature. But Mabel felt her throat tighten. She sat on the worn bench, holding the mug in both hands. The tea was strong and bitter with pine, but it warmed her chest. She looked toward the woods beyond the window. Something was changing, not fast, not loud, but real. She had been tossed away like broken furniture, sold like livestock, measured by a womb that refused to bloom. But here, in this lopsided cabin with no front door, someone saw her hands, her effort, her care, not her failure. That afternoon, Benji toddled up, lifted his arms, and said one word, clear as sunrise, "Maple." For the first time in weeks, she smiled back, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Spring crept slowly into the pines, softening the frostbite that had gripped the land. Mabel no longer cried at night. Her fingers grew steady again, her voice firmer. She started teaching the children letters, using charcoal on worn planks, helping them learn their names and hum simple songs. She showed Hannah how to tie a ribbon in her hair and stitched matching scarves from old feed sacks for each of them. They called her Miss May. She never corrected them, but even as the days warmed, fear remained under her ribs like a bruise not yet healed. One afternoon, Silas asked if she could ride with him into town to pick up salt and tin nails. He said nothing more, just tossed her the reins like she belonged at the general store. Mabel stepped out while Silas waited in line for supplies. The air was thick with gossip as usual, and then a voice, sharp and cruel, cut through the clatter. "Well, if it ain't the barren ghost herself." Mabel turned slowly. Her mother-in-law stood in front of the dry goods stand, fanning herself with a folded newspaper. Next to her was the new wife, young and smug, wearing lace gloves and touching her belly in a gesture too practiced. "That's her?" the girl asked, loud enough for half the market to hear. "Yes," the older woman sneered, pretty but cursed. "Could not give us even a squalling pup." "I will," the girl said, chin high. "A big, healthy boy, and he will carry the family name, not like her, useless as a cracked jar." Mabel's hands balled into fists. At her sides, she did not speak. Her throat was thick with everything she would not give them, the tears, the pain, the shame. She turned to walk away, then a hand touched her shoulder. Silas had stepped out from the shade of the store, dirt still clinging to his boots, eyes like storm clouds. He looked at the two women without blinking, then turned to Mabel. His voice was even and low. "She is the only one who can get my daughter to sleep," he said. "The only one who taught Benji not to throw stones, the only one who makes our house feel like it has a roof." Neither woman responded, they just stared. Then Silas led Mabel away, no more words wasted. Mabel sat quiet the whole wagon ride back. That night, when the children were asleep, she made a little wreath from the wild airs that bloomed near the well. She did not know why, she just needed to make something soft with her own hands again. Weeks passed, then the whispers began. The new wife, so proud and fertile, still had no child. Her belly stayed flat, her voice grew sharper, and she refused to go to church. Whispers turned to rumors, she had taken up with a mail writer from the post station. Desperation drove her to a dangerous plan, fake a pregnancy by any means. But truth has a smell, and it clings. Her husband found out, the news spread like fire. He kicked her out, tore down the nursery curtains, cursed the lies. He aged a decade in days. Then one morning, Mabel was in town buying flour when he appeared, her ex-husband. He looked worn and wrinkled, hat crushed in his hands, shame on every line of his face. "Mabel," he said, soft and broken, "I was wrong. I see it now. You are the only woman who ever truly cared for me, the only one who," she raised her hand. "I remember the day you let your mother spit on me, the day you threw me out like a spoiled meal because my body could not do what yours could not either." "Ha," he swallowed, eyes darting. "I was a fool." Mabel stepped forward, voice steady. "I have 4 children who hug me when I wake up. I have a man who never asks what I cannot give, only what I want to share. My house is full, full of warmth, of laughter, of peace." She paused. "And I would rather sweep ashes for Silas than sit in your parlor like a porcelain trophy." He opened his mouth but said nothing. She turned and walked away. From across the street, Silas stood holding a sack of rice. He had seen it all, heard it all. His face held no pride, only something deeper, gratitude and love, not born of pity but of choice, chosen not once but every day. The sky was streaked with ash and orange, a tired dusk settling over the valley when Mabel stepped out to the well. She had forgotten to fetch water for the morning. The children were asleep, the night was quiet. She did not notice the man at first, Jed, the trapper from down the ridge, half drunk as usual, leaning on the fence post that bordered their property. "Well, look who it is," he slurred. "The pretty little mule Silas dragged home from the market. Thought you were barren, but heard you've been rye." Mabel stiffened. "It's late, Jed. You should head home." He chuckled. "Just wanted a look. Silas keeps you locked up tighter than a coin purse." She turned to leave, but he moved fast, too fast. His hand closed around her wrist, rough and unwashed, the grip tighter than necessary. Come on now, he breathed, reeking of sweat and whiskey. You owe us all a little smile after all that gossip. Before she could scream, before she could wrench free, a shadow moved like thunder from the barn. Silas was there in an instant, no words, no warning. One punch, clean, fast, straight to Jed's jaw. The man crumpled like wet canvas to the dirt. For a moment, all was still, even the wind seemed to stop. Silas stood over him, chest heaving, blood trickling from his knuckles. Mabel stared, heart pounding, but not from fear. She had never seen Silas raise his voice, let alone his hand. Jed groaned on the ground, but Silas did not look at him. He turned to Mabel instead, eyes dark and wild. You all right? He asked, voice low. She nodded, but her eyes were glassy, her hands trembling. I'm sorry, she whispered, though she was not sure why. Silas stepped closer, untying the red kerchief from his neck. Gently, he reached for her hand, the one Jed had grabbed, and wrapped the cloth around her wrist. No one touches you, he said. Not unless I say. His voice was not angry, just firm. Final. Then he looked at his own hand, bruised and bleeding, and shook his head. Damn fool, he muttered, more to himself than to her. Back inside, Mabel washed his knuckles. She used boiled water and a clean scrap of muslin. The room was silent but full of tension, of something unnamed. You did not have to, she said quietly. He would have left. Silas looked at her, eyes softening. He should not have grabbed you. She dabbed at the blood. Still, you do not even like fighting. I like less seeing someone hurt you, he replied. She blinked hard, breath catching. I cried, she admitted, but not because I was scared. Because no one's ever stood up for me like that. He said nothing, just looked at her like she was something delicate but not breakable, something worth defending. When she finished, she sat back. He flexed his fingers. Thank you, she said. Silas shrugged. I reckon I do not want a world where folks like him think they can talk to you that way. She smiled, small and grateful. Her wrist still ached, but her heart, for the first time in years, felt held. Outside, the stars were sharp and bright. Inside, a man who never raised his voice had finally raised his hand for her, and she, a woman always told she was too little to matter, had been shielded like something precious. It was not love yet, but it was the shape love might take. It was a morning lined with frost, the kind that clung to defense posts and left breath visible. Mabel was kneading dough in the kitchen when the scream rang out across the yard, sharp, high, and unmistakably one of the children. She dropped the bowl, flour flying into the air like snow, and ran barefoot across the packed dirt. Caleb was crumpled near the wood pile, his leg twisted awkwardly beneath him, the axe lying nearby, its edge stained with red. Oh God, she whispered, dropping to her knees. Silas was already there, his face tight, arms steady as he lifted the boy gently. Go boil water, he said, his voice calm but urgent. Bring the bandages from the pantry. She ran, her heart hammering, her hands clumsy with haste. When she returned, Silas had laid the boy on the kitchen table, his pants cut open at the thigh, blood welled from a long, ragged gash. Mabel's hands shook as she pressed the cloth to the wound. Caleb cried out, his face pale. I know, baby, she whispered, her voice cracking. I know it hurts, just hold on. Her tears dripped onto the boy's leg as she worked, her fingers smeared red as she cleaned, wrapped, and tied. She prayed with every knot, every whisper. Then a tiny voice, through clenched teeth, said, Don't cry, Mama. She froze. The word lingered in the warm, damp air. Mama. Caleb blinked at her, lips trembling. You make the best biscuits. You sing soft like my real mama used to. Mabel cupped his cheek with a trembling hand, the tears falling freely now. Later, when the boy was resting, his leg elevated, the other children gathered near the fire. One brought her a blanket, another offered her a carved toy horse. Papa said, "You're staying," said the middle child, a freckled girl with a serious brow. "Does that mean you're our mama now?" Mabel could not speak, she only nodded, and they did not need more. From that night on, they called her mama without prompting. It was not loud, not ceremonious, just real, a name formed by love, not birth. Silas watched it all in silence. He saw the way she held their hands when they were afraid of the dark, the way she braided hair with care, the way her eyes softened when one of them whispered her name. That night, after the house had gone still, Silas stepped out onto the porch where she sat alone under the stars. He stood there a long time before speaking. "I ain't ever been a good talker, you know that." She looked up. "You say enough." He nodded. "When I put money down at that market, I thought I was giving you a way out, but I never thought I had a right to keep you." Mabel turned, heart thudding. "I figured you'd leave once you had your footing," he continued. "And if that's what you want, I won't stop you. I won't hold you to what started as a sale." She stared at him, every muscle in her body trembling, not from fear but from something deeper, older, more tender. "I used to think love meant being chosen at first sight," she said softly, "but I've learned something better, being chosen again after people see who you really are." Silas's jaw tightened. "If you're not sending me away," she added, "then I'm not going." The porch creaked beneath her as she stepped toward him, took his calloused hand. "I may not have made these children," she said, "but they made me something I thought I'd never be. And you let me be that without demanding anything in return." He looked at her then, not with desperation. He was not with guilt but with awe, like she was the one who had rescued him. "I just wanted you safe," he said. "And now I want more than safe," she replied. He pulled her gently into his arms, not as a man claiming a prize but as a man who had been given a second chance and was wise enough to hold it gently. The fire crackled low outside, frost crept across the ground, but in between them, warmth grew, a quiet promise built not on blood but on belonging. The morning sun filtered through the pine trees, golden and soft, as Mabel walked hand in hand with the oldest of Silas's children down the dirt path that led to the one-room schoolhouse. His hand was small but firm, and hers warm with trust. He was 10, bright-eyed with a defiant smirk that often made her want to both scold and kiss his forehead. Today, though, he was quiet, maybe nervous. He clutched his reader book like it was a life raft. When they reached the little building, the teacher, a tall lean man with spectacles too large for his nose, welcomed them inside. "We're just catching up on paperwork," he said politely, flipping through some forms. "I just need to finalize the birth registry, Mom." Mabel nodded, smoothing the boy's collar. "What's your full name, son?" the teacher asked. The boy straightened. "Thomas Jennings." "And your mother's name?" There was a pause, the teacher's pen hovered. Mabel's breath caught. Thomas looked up at her, then back at the teacher, his voice clear and sure. "Mabel Silas." She blinked, her heart felt like it had been caught mid-beat. "Is that your mother's married name?" the teacher asked, slightly confused. Thomas nodded with a seriousness too old for his age. "That's what we call her." The teacher, perhaps used to complexities in frontier families, simply wrote it down and smiled. "Very well, Mabel Silas it is." Mabel felt the sting behind her eyes long after they stepped back outside. She had worn many names in her life: Mabel Barnes, daughter of a man who sold her; Mabel Jennings, wife to a man who rejected her womb before her heart; Mabel Nothing, whispered behind her back in the market. But this name had not been given by law or man, it had been spoken by a child with no reason to lie, no need to flatter, just truth. When they returned to the cabin, the smell of smoke and pine welcomed them. Silas was at the table, carving something small, a bird maybe. He looked up at her with a soft grunt. "The boy do all right?" "He did more than all right," she whispered later that evening as she folded laundry by the fireplace. Silas came over and set something beside her. It was a leather-bound notebook, its pages clean and untouched. He sat down beside her, hands resting on his knees. "I don't got much to offer that ain't covered in sap or dirt," he said slowly, "but I figure if anyone earned a fresh page, it's you." She opened the book, ran her fingers over the first page, blank, ready. "I used to dream of starting over," she said, "but I never thought I'd get to write the story myself." Silas nodded. "What you want or nothing, it's yours." She looked at him. "Will you read it?" "Only if you let me." She turned back to the page, held the pen like it was a promise, and slowly, with deliberate strokes, she wrote, "Today is the first day I was loved without having to give birth to anyone." She did not look up as she wrote it, she did not need to because the warmth at her side, the quiet trust in the cabin, the way Thomas had said her name, all of it was real. When she finished, Silas gently took the pen from her fingers and set it down. He leaned forward, pressing his forehead softly against hers. "Thank you," he murmured. "For what?" "For staying long enough for us to love you, right?" And in that quiet, warm room, the woman once sold for less than a cow was reborn, not through law or marriage, but through something deeper, something true. The heat settled over the land like a curse. Rain had not touched the soil in over 7 weeks. The once green edges of Cross Hollow were now brittle and cracked, as if the ground itself had forgotten how to breathe. Trees leaned in silence. The creek behind the house, once lively with frogs and laughter, had thinned to a muddy trickle. Crops withered under the relentless sun. The corn died first, then the beans. Silas did not say much, but his shoulders carried more weight with each passing day. He worked longer, ate less, and came home with dirt in his hair and defeat in his eyes. Mabel watched the children count potatoes like marbles. She heard their stomachs growl at night, though none complained. Even the youngest had learned to be brave when there was nothing left to cry over. But Mabel would not accept silence, not now. She woke before dawn and filled every bucket, pot, and wash basin with water from the deepest well. Then she pulled a scarf over her hair, wrapped her hands in cloth, and marched toward the dead garden. She dug even when the earth was hard as stone. She broke the dirt open, turned it over, made room for roots, even where life seemed unwelcome. The other workers watched her, some shook their heads, a few offered to help, but she refused. This was her fight. Every morning she watered the patch, every evening she checked the soil. When the leaves sagged, she sang old lullabies as she poured water gently at their base. One afternoon, Silas stumbled through the door, face pale, knees buckling. She caught him before he hit the ground. "Just tired," he rasped, waving her off, but she felt the heat on his skin. He burned with fever. For 2 nights, Mabel stayed beside him, wiping sweat from his brow, spooning broth into his mouth between fits of coughing. She spoke softly, stories of green hills and warm bread, though her voice trembled with fear. One night, as the wind howled like a ghost against the shutters, Silas turned in his sleep. His hand reached out blindly, and he muttered, "Mabel, do not leave me, not you too." Her breath caught. She leaned down, lips brushing his temple. "I am not going anywhere," she whispered. "Not when I am needed, and here I am needed." The favor broke by dawn when he opened his eyes. She was there, hair undone, dirt smudged on her cheek, hands rough from the hoe but warm as ever. "You look like hell," he croaked. She laughed, "You should see yourself." Outside, the garden was not dead, not yet. Tiny green shoots had started pushing through, reaching for life. A week later, one of the boys ran in shouting, "May, there's a tomato." Mabel ran out, there it was, red and stubborn, clinging to a vine as if defying the sun itself. Silas followed slowly. He stood beside her, staring at that single fruit. "How?" he asked, voice raw. She looked at him, "You taught me not everything worth keeping comes easy." He glanced down at her blistered hands, then without a word, he bent and kissed each knuckle, soft as rain. That night, they shared that tomato between 6 people. It was cut into slivers thinner than a coin, but everyone swore it was the best thing they had ever tasted. Later, as the fire crackled low and the children slept in tangled piles on the floor, Silas reached for her hand. "I do not have much left to give," he said. "The land is failing, my strength fades. All I have is this place, these kids, and you." She turned to him, her smile gentle. "Then that is more than enough, because before you, I had a name no one wanted to say. Now I have a garden that remembers my hands, children who call me home, and a man who asked me to stay." Even in drought, Silas kissed her knuckles again. "You never needed rain to grow something beautiful." Outside, under a sky still waiting to forgive, the garden breathed alive, still trying just like her. Years passed, but the wind on the hill never changed. It still carried the scent of dry earth, of pine needles baking in the sun, and the faint stubborn sweetness of mustard greens growing against all odds. Mabel's garden, once a handful of seeds on cracked soil, now stretched wide behind the house. It was not grand or orderly, it bent with the wind, grew in crooked lines, spilled over the rocks and into the path. But it was alive. It was hers. Every morning, Silas stood on the porch, hands behind his back, watching her tend it. He never spoke while she worked, he just stood there, quiet as always, as if watching proof that miracles did not need loud voices to bloom. Then one spring, the men came, government men in clean boots and dustless hats, holding maps and promises. "There will be a railroad," one said. "Right through this hill. We will pay good money." Mabel stood silent beside Silas, fingers curled under her apron. "Think of what you could give your children," the man added. "A real home, not just land and stories." Silas looked past them, past the papers and suits and easy smiles, to the garden beyond. The plants swayed gently in the breeze. He saw the fence he had built with his own hands, the swing Mabel had hung from the oak tree, the stones marking where the dog had been buried, the carved bench where they had sat that first hard winter. Everything that had ever truly belonged to him stood right there. "No," he said. Said simply, they tried again, but he raised a hand. "I am not moving. This land is not for sale." Later that evening, he and Mabel hammered a wooden sign at the edge of the road. It read, "Not for sale. Someone was once allowed to stay here, that is enough." The news spread through the town. Some mocked him, others nodded quietly, understanding more than they said. Years went by, their children married, brought home grandchildren. The house filled with noise, bread baking, and the clatter of small feet. Life carved itself into the hill like roots, deep, steady, unseen from afar but unshakable. The garden never died, even in drought, it came back. Not just mustard greens anymore, but beans, corn, onions, sunflowers tall enough to hide behind. One crisp fall afternoon, a grandson asked Silas, "Grandpa, why do you never call it just Mabel's garden?" Silas walked the boy to the gate and pointed to the archway above it. There, carved carefully into the wood, were the words, "She did not bear my blood, but she gave birth to the rest of my life." The boy blinked. "You mean she gave you a new start?" Silas smiled. "She gave me everything." When Mabel passed, they buried her at the foot of the garden, under the same tree where she had once hung wind chimes. On the stone, Silas etched one line by hand, "Here grew everything she was never given and all that she gave." Anyway, he sat beside that grave every morning until one day he did not come out. They buried him beside her, beneath the whispering tree. The garden never stopped growing, and long after the railroad curved around the hill, long after the suits forgot why they came, travelers would still pass the old fence and read the sign, "Not for sale." Because sometimes a place remembers those who refuse to leave. Sometimes dry hills bloom for the ones who chose love when no one else did. If this story touched something quiet and true inside your heart, the way Mabel's garden bloomed where no one believed it could, then you are in the right place. At Wild West Love Stories, we bring you more than just romance. We bring you grit, sacrifice, and the kind of love that rises from dust and stays through drought. Stories like Mabel and Silas remind us that even the most forgotten hills can hold the deepest roots. If you want more tales of devotion, defiance, and hard-earned hope, make sure to like, subscribe, and ring that bell so you never miss a single ride into the untamed heart of the American frontier. Because out here, love is never easy, but it is always worth it.